Hi, my name is Nikara Neeraj,
My name is Pranati Rapasad.
And I'm Taraya.
and and today we have a special guest, Taraya, who is here to answer some of our questions and just let us know what it's like, let us know her experiences with ADHD.
So, just to start us off, a lot of students assume that ADHD always means, struggling in school. So, can you tell us how ADHD might look different in students who seem to be doing well academically?
A lot of students assume that ADHD automatically means that bad grades or constant academic failure, but in reality, ADHD can look very different in students who are doing well in school because some students with ADHD performs highly because they've developed coping mechanisms early on. They have strong support systems, or they're genuinely interested in the subjects that they're studying, and their success can mask the underlying challenges, making their ADHD less visible to teachers and their friends and stuff. So in high achieving students, ADHD often shows up less as bad grades and more as invisible effort, because the kids that have ADHD may spend more time on assignments than relying on a drill, the anxiousness from deadlines to focus on, because they mentally feel exhausted from constantly forcing themselves to concentrate. So perfection anxiety and over preparing can become survival strategies that help them succeed academically.
Okay, so why do high achieving students often go unnoticed or get diagnosed later, even when they're putting in a lot of effort behind the scenes?
um I think that high achieving students are often diagnosed with ADHD later because their success hides the struggle. When grades are really good and teachers and parents and even friends tend to assume everything's fine, but the intense effort happening behind the scenes that no one really sees goes unnoticed. Um personally, when students learn early on that as long as they're performing well, the stress and everything isn't taken seriously because you're rewarded for it, so you mentally accept it. And sorry, I'm it's just I just feel that these strategies work on the surface, but they require more energy than being sustainable, which delays the recognition that something deeper is going on. Another reason is that ADHD is often misunderstood as a lack of ability rather than a difference in executive functioning. So high achieving students are frequently labeled as gifted or driven. So their forgetfulness, procrastination, or overwhelm emotional overwhelmness is attributed to the personality instead of ADHD. So it literally goes off the roof and no one sees it because they meet the expectations that no one thinks to look for in the issues.
Thank you. Okay, so what is masking and why do students sometimes not realize they're doing it?
Um Masking is when students unconsciously hides their traits, ADHD traits, in order to meet the expectations, I've said, or just avoid judgment or appear put together, because instead of their challenges being visible, they cover them up with extra effort and perfection, people pleasing, all that stuff. Because from the outside, it can look like that student is organized, motivated, and successful, even though internally they're overwhelmed and exhausted. I mean, we are all overwhelmed and exhausted, but it gets to a point where we're striving for the better, we're trying to hide everything for the better, and I mean, it does get confusing with personality traits, but students often don't realize that they're masking because these behaviors develop gradually and feel more normal to that person. It just feels like that's you. So if a student grows up being praised for good grades and reliability, they feel it just feels normal. and they may or like learn early on that struggling is acceptable or that they won't be taken seriously, so they adapt without questioning it. Masking also goes unnoticed because it's rewarded. Like I've said, like teachers and adults usually praise your outcomes and not the cost that you've put through in achieving them. Yeah.
Okay, so what are some misconceptions students themselves have about ADHD that you wish were corrected earlier?
Um, I personally, I feel like one of the biggest misconceptions that students have is that, um, when you like ADHD, when someone says like, "Oh, we have ADHD," like that means that you're lazy or undisciplined or you're not just trying hard enough or it's just like a disease you have. Like you're just labeled as a disease. So many students like grow up believing that if they just focus more or manage their time better, they won't struggle as much. But this leads to a lot of like self-blame, which also like contradicts with other mental health like wellness, you know, like especially for high achieving students who are already putting in like far more effort than others just like to keep up, you know. And another common misconception is that ADHD always looks obvious. Like people think like ADHD only applies to people who are hyperactive, disruptive, or failing classes, but because of this, like the students who are quiet, anxious, or high performing like don't recognize their own symptoms. Like they just assume that ADHD can't apply to them because they get good grades or they aren't visibly impulsive. And many students also think that like I used to think that ADHD is something like you outgrow or something that like only matters in childhood, but it actually like sticks to you because like you're unprepared from symptoms that become more disruptive during like adolescence like and transitions in your life like adulthood. So if more students understood that earlier, like ADHD can change over time and that struggling doesn't mean failing, it could prevent years of burnout and like shame and like self-guilt because it helps you like understand and like keep yourself together, like put together more.
Okay, so for our final question, what is one thing that you want students at competitive schools, perhaps like ours, to understand about focus, effort, and ADHD?
Um Students at competitive schools like often grow up believing that focus and effort are purely matters of willpower and that like if you care enough or work hard enough, you'll be able to like concentrate. One of the most important things to understand is that ADHD is not a lack of effort. It's a difference in how like the brain regulates attention and energy. Like many students with ADHD in like competitive schools are actually working harder than the other students just to reach the same outcome, even if their effort is invisible. Like another key like thing to understand is that looking focused isn't the same thing as being focused. Like I could go on days with ADHD just like staring at my notes for hours and hours like while fighting like the distraction because like there might not be any distraction but like you're just not like your brain doesn't like automatically accept your effort. So a student with like an ADHD at competitive schools might not be as productive where everyone seems productive. This can like create the false belief that like struggling to focus means you don't belong, when in reality, many students who are struggling quietly in similar ways also is important to recognize that effort has a cost. So like these in like high pressure environments, like students with ADHD often rely on stress and urgency to like perfect their function and but they're mentally exhausted and like often lead to burnout. So needing breaks and structure to support isn't a failure, it's like a way to protect your brain.
Thank you so much for joining us today and giving us so much great insight into your experience as a student with ADHD. For all those who are watching and listening, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you learned something new. Thank you.
Thank you guys.